Always good to meet so many fans. This is an inside joke from MSPGeekCon. I'm so sorry that I said this. I have a terrible ego. You'll probably notice that more during the entire session. I'll probably be referencing a lot of stuff around my ego because I like standing on a stage. It's fun. I was supposed to be here today with a Microsoft employee that specializes in graph, that is an actual graph developer. Due to some logistical reasons, he couldn't make it. So I guess I'll have to do. It was an AMA, Ask Me Anything. Now it's an AKA, Ask Kelvin Everything. Microsoft wanted me to talk about a couple of things before we get started with the entire AMA thing. And you can really ask questions in any way that you're comfortable with. Ashley is currently looking at the coop for any questions that you want to chat to us. I have the Whova app open, so if you're shy and don't want to talk into a microphone, just ask it on the Whova app and I'll try to answer your questions from there too. Okay, so let's get started with the stuff Microsoft wanted me to tell you guys. Number one is there are a lot of low-code developers in the room, right? Everyone here is using Roost? Did I get a show of hands? It's that fun presenter thing where, wow, that's almost half the crowd, a bit more. So Microsoft has a passion to make sure that any type of coder, whether you're being a full-time developer somewhere, an automation specialist, or when you're even someone at the administration department or anything like that that just wants to automate stuff, they have a passion to make the Graph API more accessible for everyone. So a couple of things that Microsoft wants you to know about this is, number one, the Graph API actually has a lot of resources available specifically for low-code developers. If you Google right now, Microsoft Low-Code University, I think I'm saying it right, they have courses online, absolutely free, where you only have to log in with a Microsoft account and you're able to actually learn how to use the Graph API in a low-code environment. Don't worry if you can't find it on Google right now, I'll make sure I'll share the link in Whova after the presentation. A second thing that they need everyone to be aware of is that Microsoft has dedicated all of their development resources to the Graph API only. There's an internal change that happened at Microsoft that says that you are no longer allowed to develop an API if it's not going to be a Graph API. So you're no longer allowed to develop any product that doesn't interface with Graph directly. That also means that we're getting rid of a lot of cool stuff that we used to have. Everyone knows the PowerShell MS Online module. It's a module that almost any system administrator had to use. That one has been deprecated a couple of months ago and actually ceases to function in 2 weeks completely. All of that is being transferred to the Graph API. Actually, still stuff is being transferred to the Graph API right now. It's not all transferred already. But Microsoft needs to get your feedback on why you need specific functionality from the older modules to be available in your newer environments in Graph. They need that kind of feedback, and for that they have the Feedback Hub, which on your device, on your Windows device, you can actually type Windows key F, which starts the Feedback Hub. It's a Windows feature, and you can actually ask them or tell them specific reasoning why you need the Graph API to be available for something that you're using, which is actually pretty cool because they are analyzing that feedback and implementing it. A good example of that is per user MFA, which was recently introduced into the Graph API. And on the subject, I'm moving on to the last point they really wanted me to make, which is a lot of developers have issues with understanding the constant evolvement in, or constant evolving of the Microsoft Graph API. It's difficult to get caught up on all the new things they're introducing, but it's also hard to understand when something is moving from a beta endpoint to a V1 endpoint and all of these kind of like more complex technical questions. Right now, if you Google what's new Microsoft Graph, they have a dedicated docs page that actually describes all the new APIs they've introduced this month. If you're really technical, they do that in a very high overview, saying like, these are a couple of new APIs we've introduced, and they have a changelog link available. If you click on the log, you're actually able to see exactly what they added to the API. And this means that in a lot of cases, you can discover that you are able to use an API much earlier than there's even some documentation available or these kind of things. Sometimes they just publish it in the changelog, and it's available, but they haven't documented it yet, so they still need to get caught up. And you are actually already able to use that API. So those were the points that Microsoft wanted me to make. Let me actually grab my phone, because there were already some questions that came in. And after that, we're moving to our AMA portion of the talk. And that only works if you guys are interactive, if you guys want to ask questions about Microsoft Graph. Could I get a show of hands of anyone that isn't using Microsoft Graph in their Roost workflows or that kind of stuff? Okay, so if I ask it in reverse, if you are, it should be all of you, right? Okay, that's a lot of people. Okay, all right. The first question was sent through Huva, and that is, what are some reliable resources for beginners with Graph? The documentation. There's, of course, I'll say that. No, but the documentation is a great place to get started with Graph. There's actually a couple of things that can help you understand what you're doing quicker. Yesterday during our M365 pre-day, our security pre-day, we also talked about this. There is a tool called the Graph Explorer. The Graph Explorer allows you to get graph data without having to use any automation tools. From the documentation, you have a big button right at the top, Try in Graph Explorer. You press that button, you can actually execute any command you were on the documentation page for and see what kind of result it would have. Another really cool resource for beginners, especially if you're doing a lot in Intune, is the Microsoft Graph X-Ray tool. Microsoft Graph X-Ray is made by Merrill Fernando. Merrill Fernando is a identity product manager at Microsoft. His tool allows you to get the data that your browser is doing in the Graph API. So for example, you're going to the Azure portal and you're disabling users from being allowed to create groups. The moment you do this, a specific command is sent to the Graph API. Graph X-Ray allows you to immediately extract exactly the command that was sent, the payload that was sent, and how you're supposed to authenticate. It even gives you immediate PowerShell, JavaScript, and some other examples that you can just copy and paste, so it decreases a lot of the work. So that's some good examples for beginner resources for the Graph API. I'm not seeing any new questions. Actually, I am seeing one very important question that unfortunately I can't answer, but bring back negative time savings. All right, any questions? Oh, I should also look in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to date myself terribly. I used to cover the Win32 API, right, way back when, and the shift from Win16. Fast forward to this Graph API. For folks like me in the room, there may be a few of us who are really clueless when it comes to Graph. Could you define for us just how open is this API? How well documented are the APIs? And is it Microsoft dictating what this thing is and why you should do it, or is it more of an industry movement towards this because of the overall goodness of it? Can you give us sort of that context overall?
That's actually a really fun question. Looking at the Graph API, Graph isn't actually a Microsoft product. Graph was created by Facebook. It is a universal standard that is a specific way to talk to a RESTful API. Now, I don't want to get too deep down into the technical details, but the idea is that everything that you have that is a product on its own should be able to communicate to any other product that you make in-house. And the idea of Graph is that you connect all of those resources directly together. And that's actually a really good example. Intune, for example, used to have a complex, separate API where no one really understood what it was doing because it was poorly documented, it was only for internal use, and system administrators just couldn't utilize it. And with Graph, Microsoft has said, we want to go to this open ecosystem where everyone can plug into everything that Microsoft is doing at any time. If we are doing something internally, we want you externally to be able to access the same things. And I mean, like Joe just said, Win32 APIs didn't always work that way. Like Microsoft was very well known for doing things in their operating system that no one else could do simply because they blocked access to those APIs. With the Graph API, they have decided that they really truly want to build an open ecosystem for any cloud product that they create. And that is an important distinction as well. The Graph API is really only focused on Microsoft and Azure Cloud. It isn't focused, or Microsoft 365 and Azure Cloud. It isn't focused on their local products. For example, your local Exchange server will not be accessible through the Graph API and is still allowed to have their own custom API. So Microsoft does have some work to do with those type of products still.
I could ask one follow-up.
Oh, always.
Okay, thank you for the answer. The follow-up would be this. Back, again, I'm dating myself, when I started learning about SQL, right? All the database companies had their various SQL implementations, right? And Linux, Red Hat, Caldera, they were all different flavors of it. Is this an industry standard approach, or are there all different flavors of Graph that I've got to worry about?
I'd love to say the Microsoft internal thing that they always say that, yeah, everything Graph is absolutely unified, but that's BS. That is not happening. There's still a lot of different teams working on a lot of different products within Microsoft. So yes, while it should be one universal standard and everyone should stick to that, there's still teams that are saying, yeah, but we need a little bit extra, or we need something a little bit different, which results into a weird mix. You notice this especially if you're working with the Graph API already and you try to do something in SharePoint management. The errors you get from SharePoint management are completely abstracted away, and you don't get any actual feedback from that API. But if you try the same for user management, you get the exact problem, the description directly back in your error code. So too many teams working on too many different things. Yes, it should be a industry standard. Yes, there are specific RFCs that they have to stick to, but there's also developers that like making their own stuff. Especially Microsoft developers. Be checking. Any other questions? I see some hands right there. Also, these lights are beautiful. I will not be able to see hands, so just really try to wave at me or something, okay? Or shout.
I'm Scott from Azure. We're an MSP in New York. Have a question about two questions actually. One is we have a list of what they've just implemented. Do we have a roadmap of what they're going to put in the future?
So you have a list of what they just implemented. Road mapping is difficult for Microsoft. That is. Listen, I'm a Microsoft MVP, not a Microsoft employee. I can make fun of them as much as I want, but roadmapping is difficult also because they are a publicly listed company, and anything that they put on a roadmap could affect their financial status, that kind of stuff. So they're not allowed to very publicly announce these things. What you can do if you want a roadmap for what is coming to the Graph API, follow the Microsoft Build events. They often have 1 or 2 sessions specifically dedicated to the Graph API. And using those, I think their sessions are like 45 minutes. And using those sessions, you can very clearly see which direction they're taking. They might not specifically talk about roadmap items, but they will say like, we expect this product to be completely in graph by this date. So not direct roadmap items, but you will be able to see a direction more by following the Microsoft Build videos. Microsoft Build is a conference normally oriented at developers, and most of you in here are system administrators. Most of the content will be really dry and boring for you. Don't try to watch everything. Specifically focus on the graph stuff.
And the second question was around the beta version. So the beta version, you kind of said the other day, was not really, we shouldn't consider it beta, but they very clearly documented that it's beta. Like even if you just go to the beta site, it's beta, not production use. How do you feel about that statement?
Yeah, so this is actually so much fun. Microsoft is really good at naming things. Entra ID, for example, which rhymes with magenta. Another inside joke for Roost. Microsoft is very poor at naming things. The V1 Graph API is a static set in time from a specific point in time that Microsoft has selected as this is production ready. Then you have the Beta API, which is a bit of a misnomer, because the Beta API is supported if you have a Microsoft support contract. The latest tools that Microsoft builds are all tools that are based on the Beta API. You go to the Intune portal right now and you click on anything, you'll see that the calls being made are all to graph.microsoft.com/beta. That's because Microsoft made a little mistake when they created the Graph API the very first time. They said that we want two specific versions, one a nightly build that is very rapid and changes a lot, and one version that is set in stone, documented. Thing is that each new API that's added and that does not have a full set of documentation yet will remain in beta forever. And a full set of documentation is something that is almost unachievable for any API. So it's going to take very long for them to transfer that over. So eventually Microsoft said, you know what, we are supporting beta fully. If you have a Microsoft support contract, you can actually tell them like, hey, this beta API isn't working, and they'll work for a fix for you as soon as possible. They even added versioning to the API recently, which is a pretty cool feature. If you specifically want a dated version of the Graph API, you can now add the query parameter at the end, version is 01/01/2024. And you get a response from the Graph API as it was 01/01/2024. That also means that it's very easy for you to say like, okay, hey, the API changed on this specific date. I only want to use the version from before that date. That is Microsoft's new versioning capabilities, which makes it a lot easier to also create your own workflows or automations based around a specific set-in-time API. Does that answer your question? Cool. There were some more questions in chat, right?
Got one over here.
Got one. My name is Emmett. I'm based out of a MSP in the Midwest. For people using Graph in Roost, which is better, a Graph certification or just searching for the API calls that, like what we saw in the 100 series for Roost?
Good question. My personal opinion is that you want to abstract as much away from yourself as possible. So you want to use the very specific, let's use Roost as an example because the workflow builder is amazing. You'll want to specifically use everything that's pre-built because so much of it is abstracted away from you. You don't have to worry about exactly how you're shaping your body because it's no longer your responsibility if you're using that specific action. You don't have to worry about, oh, my API changed and I have to now go make changes to my workflow. It's the responsibility of the Roost developers who are very much on top of any changes in the Graph API. So the moment that something breaks, they'll be the first to know and they'll be the first to fix it way before you're able to log in and say, hey, this workflow changed. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Mario asked, this might be too specific of a question, but are there no graph commands for the MFA registration policy? Had this functionality been moved, or is it a different command? And he actually sent a picture with it. Thank you. Yes. So the registration campaigns are now found in a different location, and the screenshot you sent is the location that is the old new location, because this is the third time that Microsoft changed where this is. So registration campaigns can now be found under self-service, password reset, and registration campaigns combined experience. Now that's a mouthful. So yeah, it's a different location, and yes, there is an API directly available for that. I don't know the exact API endpoint. I know that, like, for example, in SIP, we use a specific endpoint to enable the registration campaign. So it's absolutely possible to influence that. I will reply to you directly with the exact link to the API, so you'll be able to use that. 1 second, I just need to refresh this.
Hey, Kelvin, Andrew Morgan, I have a question for you while you're looking there.
Sure.
I don't know if you mentioned that you got a unique perspective. You have a decent sized MSP in the Netherlands. You have 5,000 plus people using SIP. So not everybody in here raised their hand saying they're using Graph. Based on your perspective, are there areas that people should start? Are there areas that when you look at the 5,000 MSPs using SIP that you're like, ooh, that's a really good way to, use automation with, something to mitigate threats in M365? Can you just help people get perspective on where to begin? Maybe some gotchas on, getting into the graph where they probably are jumping ahead too much and where they probably should start.
Okay, that's a really cool one. Let me walk back from that a little. Let me walk backwards from that. So to get started with the Graph API and get started with automation, the Graph API, start thinking about user management. Andrew is very security focused, and I love that. He immediately sees the Graph API as the ability to help you increase your cybersecurity posture. But the Graph API is so much more than just security. Imagine that you no longer have to go into 1,000 portals for management of your users. Imagine when you're offboarding a user that you don't have to first click into the Exchange portal and say, convert this to a shared mailbox, and then have to go back and reset its password, and then have to go to the SharePoint portal and give another user permissions on that thing. Like, that is all in the Graph API. That's all stuff that you can do today, where your process of offboarding an employee, for example, is impacted so much that you're no longer spending 30, 45 minutes offboarding a user, but you're only spending 1 or 2 minutes starting your automation to solve it. So look at those kind of problems: onboarding, offboarding, user management, password resets, all things that you can do much faster by using this API than the many, many portals that are available. I hope that answers your question, Andrew. I know that you were looking for a cybersecurity angle, but onboarding, offboarding is more my thing.
So, where's a good area to start, and where do people get stuck? And then I have a follow-up question to Andrew's.
So everyone that gets stuck at the Graph API gets stuck on one important thing: authentication. Authentication is the bane of our existence as MSPs. I mean, we have to think of how do we securely store credentials? How do we securely transfer these credentials? How do we use multi-factor authentication? And then Microsoft decided, let's make this a little bit more complex and introduce something called application delegated permissions and application service principles, and all of these complex concepts that you suddenly need to know as a system administrator to be able to just manage a user. Authentication is one of the most complex things in the Graph API. It's where everyone gets stuck. It's where everyone gets started. So you get stuck there, you're out of luck. Things to solve that are, there's a lot of really good blogs about the Graph API. Of course, I'm going to plug cyberrain.com because I blog about Graph a lot. A bit too much sometimes. But there's also Rudy Ohm's Nick Ross, another MVP who works for SourceBass, another MSP, he makes fantastic blogs explaining in very layman terms how you are able to get your automations working again after migrating to GDAP, for example. So follow those kind of blogs. Follow the technical leaders that are busy with system administration and a sort of DevOps style of working where you're more looking at how can I ease my system administration than being an actual developer.
For the audience, could you just repeat those blogs again, one by one, the specific names?
So one is cyberdrain.com, that's my own blog. The other is rudyowns.nl, I think. And the other is Nick Ross at t-365.com.
Okay. And I forget, I don't know if there's any type of group chat for the conference, or maybe just on LinkedIn, if you could link them or show them, that'd be awesome.
Put them in the Hoove app as well.
Awesome, thanks. Sorry, I'm so naive in that. And here's my naive follow-up question to Andrew's. So as you were answering Andrew's question and describing this power of the Graph API, my naive question is this. Is it almost a universal key that then hackers can use, and it's one key that can get you into everything, and how do you mitigate for that?
Yes. This is actually what our pre-day session, Protecting M365, was about yesterday. The Graph API is an extremely powerful tool, but it's also an extremely dangerous tool. By default, guest users in your portal are able to access the Graph API. Now, that is a weird realization that a user you invited as a guest in your Microsoft 365 environment is actually able to read a lot of data in your portal. They're able to read usernames, email addresses. They're able to get the entire address book, but they're also able to get the specific settings that you've set in your M365 environment as a guest. There's a lot of mitigations for these. There's a lot of hardening for this. The blogs I just mentioned also focus on hardening your M365 tenant in a way that your Graph API can't be abused. Because, like Joe asked, it's actually, if someone has access to the Graph API, especially write access, they have the keys to the kingdom. They could do anything they want. And it's not as easy to remove. Most of you have experienced business email compromise or something along the lines. It's not that easy to remove a hacker from your tenants once they get in because of the Graph API. They have so much capabilities to stay in there by creating a service principal, an application, a special hidden user, an extra guest account. There's so much complexity to that. So yes, it's very difficult to protect yourself. And there are mitigations for it. And those mitigations are mostly guidance found by fellow MVPs and bloggers that really focus on making sure that M365 is more secure. And of course, Bo Bullock's session yesterday. Check out Black Hill Security. Check out their website. They have a lot of videos on YouTube as well. Look at those videos if you're interested in M365 security. There's some more questions coming in through the app. So, Tim Weiser in the coop. I'll try to also answer all of the questions in the app afterwards. If someone has their hand up, let's go to those first, and then.
So with the Azure AD Graph API retiring today, what should we be kind of looking out for as far as migrating away from that?
You mean the Windows Graph API?
The Azure AD.
The old Azure one, yes.
Correct.
All right, yeah. So Microsoft has two Graph APIs because they love making things easy for us. There's a Graph API called windows.graph.net or graph.windows.net, one of those two. That API should no longer be used. Everything in that API has been completely migrated away. And my smile. And it's actually without that API being available anymore. There's only one graph really that you should focus on. I think long term you'll want to check if any of your scripts that you're currently running are failing right now, if you're still referencing that specific URL and nothing else. If you are, it should be a very simple conversion. Does that answer your question? Yeah, that's also a thing. Microsoft isn't all that good at making announcements somehow. I mean, billion-dollar company, no announcements. Yeah, do that. Thank you. Alden will be posting a link to all the deprecations in Hoover. Microsoft isn't very good at announcing when they deprecate a specific API, so it tends to get a bit confusing especially when it's stuff regarding Exchange, which gets postponed 17 times in a year. Yeah, I mean, basic authentication was supposed to be disabled in 2020, I think. It was disabled 6 months ago. Go ahead. Oh, no, wait, they wanted a microphone, so yeah. Oh, so many questions. Go right ahead.
Hello, my name is Caleb with a small MSP here in Florida. I just had a quick question. With going back to the graph guest user read permissions as standard, is there a business case as to why that's the default? In the view of, I guess, least permission is kind of where I'm going with this.
Okay, I'm going to clearly preface this with this is my personal opinion and not Microsoft's opinion. There was a dumbass that decided let's make the default as permissive as possible. Really, the decision was let's go as permissive as we can for everyone. And I understand that because it comes from a bit of Microsoft legacy. If you had a user account in your Active Directory, that user account was able to read the entire Active Directory, including description fields and everything. That was how it used to be. And the guys that developed the Graph API are the old developers that created Active Directory. They should have just retired. Security-wise, they've made a lot of mistakes. I'll also be the first to say that they've made a lot of strides. Currently, if you create a new tenant, it is no longer the default to be the most permissive. It actually goes to, I think there's 3 options. There's the most permissive, which allows guest users to access anything in your tenant. There's the middle option, allows them to see their own information using the Graph API. There's also the least permissive option, which doesn't allow them to do anything in your tenant.
All right. Hi, my name is Jack. I'm from Texas, work for a small MSP named Rudic Innovation and Technology. My question was, what's the most surprising feature available via the Graph API or some underrated features in your opinion?
Ooh, that's a good one. I have a lot of favorites. I have a lot of favorites in the Graph API because it's very diverse. So there's features that you don't really get access to in any other way than using the Graph API. One of them being OneDrive shortcuts. It's a stupid thing, but does anyone here use OneDrive shortcuts? A lot of hands. OneDrive shortcuts is a better syncing method for your OneDrive. It actually doesn't have the file size limits that OneDrive normally has if you're utilizing the shortcuts. So you're allowed to have more than 300,000 files and more than 5,000 files in a folder and all that kind of stuff. You're not able to create these OneDrive shortcuts unless you're logged in as the user, normally speaking. But the Graph API actually has the ability to create these files as well. So that's a very cool feature that I really thoroughly enjoy. It's like being able to create that shortcut file before the user even starts, so they have their entire environment ready. That's one of the things that I really like in the Graph API. Another cool feature, which was recently introduced. Last week, Microsoft added per user MFA to the Graph API. This is something that I'm personally a little bit proud of, because the reason they added it was because I made it my crusade to tell Microsoft that they were being idiots by paywalling multi-factor authentication behind P1, because that's what was slowly happening. Over time, Microsoft has said per user MFA is legacy and it's going away. But we're also taking away all of your management tools, so you can no longer automatically set per user MFA. You'll have to buy conditional access. I don't like paywalls. I don't like paywalls very much. All of my clients use business premium, so it doesn't really matter all that much. But over time, it's still an annoyance when you are not capable to manage something that you used to be able to manage previously. So after a lot of heavy discussions with the Microsoft Identity team, they finally reintroduced per user MFA into the Microsoft Graph. And with the ability to manage that, it means that you are able to enforce MFA for all your users across your tenants, even if you don't have conditional access. The only thing is you have to automate it yourself instead of Microsoft doing it for you. Roost is a very cool tool to actually utilize for that and just say, I want MFA deployed on all of my tenants. Please do that. Right now, just go to, if you're a Roost user, just log in, select all tenants, say, I want MFA everywhere, period. Please do. I like people's blood pressure going through the roof. Any more questions, or I'm going to answer some from the app? Like I said, I can't really see in the thing, so just wave as much as you can. No? Okay. So, okay, I'll go from top to bottom. I already answered the Roost negative time savings one. Exchange in Graph API when? That is a very eloquent question. Thank you for that. When was even spelled without the H, so. Good job, person. Exchange is a weird beast. There actually is a Graph API available for Exchange, just on a different URL because it was developed as a sidetrack by Microsoft. Slowly, these items are all being merged into the actual Graph API and becoming more restful, excuse me. And they're becoming more restful because the current API is just you're firing a PowerShell command and getting that PowerShell command back. They're improving that. They're actually making separate APIs for each of the commands. It's a work in progress. Like I said, follow the Microsoft changelog because you can actually see that every month they're adding 10, 20 new items to the Exchange APIs in Graph. More and more is happening regarding Exchange. It took a while before the Exchange teams were able to embrace Graph as a tool. It took a really long time, but they finally have, and it's finally actually happening. I'm skipping this question. Tim Weiser in the Coop asked, you mentioned in the session yesterday that Graph can send a webhook when configuration changes in a tenant. What sort of information is sent in the webhook payload? That's a really cool question, Tim. Thank you. Using Microsoft Graph, you can subscribe to any change that happens on any endpoint. So that means if you want, 5 minutes? If you want to make a change in the way that you automate things, you can start doing things a lot more event-driven. Instead of constantly running a cron job when you want to run something, you actually receive a webhook from Microsoft and process based on what you receive from that webhook. Microsoft is kind enough to send you the old data and the new data. The changes compared one by one. All you have to do is do a diff between the two, and you know which setting changed. Cool thing about this is that you can do it on so many endpoints. You can do this on the user's endpoint, so you can monitor when a new user is created and generate an alert based on that. You can do it on groups, you can do it on applications, and all of these things. So it's very easy to get those two things to compare because it's already in the payload. It's just old value, new value. All you have to do is merge the two, and from there you'll be able to use those webhooks. So it's very cool. I think we're continuing to the last question.
Do you foresee a time, I know Microsoft went back and changed some of the API payment methods for things like Teams because they were getting abused, but do you foresee a time where as an MSP we might get sideswiped or smacked and graph calls are going to start costing us?
Graph calls are already costing you. You're just paying for it in your subscription right now.
Correct, but with limits or limitations on the number of calls or the frequency of calls and that kind of stuff, particularly in an event-driven model where we want to know everything that's going on, so we start subscribing to many different things across many different tenants.
Microsoft has a very specific policy, which you can actually read online about this. Metered APIs only exist for things that are not considered normal administrative tasks and only exist for what's called enriched data. Data that they've already pre-combined and pre-sorted for you. You can get all of that data yourself by using the standard CRUD APIs as well. It's just going to take you a lot more time, a lot more effort, and the reason why you're paying Microsoft for the metered subscriptions is because they are making it easier for you. You don't have to collect all that data yourself. They explicitly say that no normal CRUD API will ever be under the metered section. That's a hard promise they make in the Graph API documentation. I think that is the final question. I saw that in the app there were still 5, 6 open questions, maybe a little more. Let me just check real quick. Okay, about 12, sorry. I will be answering those after the session. If you want to come up, I'll be walking around. Come up, talk to me, have fun. I'll be able to answer them in person as well. If you're too shy to ask a question in public like this, also feel free to just come up to me. I mean, I know we're all nerds, and being an extrovert isn't one of our specialties, is it? Yeah. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Stay for a minute. Yeah. First of all, thank you. I'm asking all these dumb questions from down there. Now I want to ask you a dumb question from up here. OpenAI, Azure OpenAI. Do you see those is Graph going to play a role in all the calls to generative AI, and what does that mean going forward? Can we power him at one of the two? I think you're up.
I'm good? Okay. So that's actually such a cool question because this is so exciting to talk about. Microsoft is already integrating OpenAI into the Graph API without you needing to really make any changes yourself. Everyone loves Copilot. I mean, Copilot is brilliant. Everyone loves Recall, right? Which is this amazing new tool that they released. Everyone loves that. They're actually doing the same thing with the Graph API. The Graph API has a search endpoint, which truly searches all of your libraries, which you can now give an AI prompt to. Now imagine doing that over all of your metadata, over all of your data. The Graph API has that available. Imagine you just say, I want to find all the financial data in my company about the year 1999, because some people are really old and have financial data that goes back that far. OpenAI will be able to find that without you needing to filter like date, yes, somewhere between 1999 and another date, and must contain the word financial. No, it actually uses the large language model to search through your data. Very cool, and you can expect a lot more like that, like the search endpoint, to exist in the Graph API very soon.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for answering so many questions. And you are available off stage later on to answer more?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.